Gaston is a small, relatively secluded town situated just south of the Columbia District in South Carolina. The population of this town has never exceeded 2,000 people. That's because the town was really small. And for me, it felt even more noticeable since I came from Roanoke, Virginia. After my mother lost her job, we were kind of forced to move there, and I remember sulking the whole way. Because for me, the only friends I was going to make there were aunts and an ever-present son. Once we settled into our house, I immediately went out to explore the neighborhood to try to make some friends. I didn't know how to ride a bike at that time, and I could barely stand on a skateboard, but I still decided to go with my board. And I went down the road that started in front of the house to a cul-de-sac that seemed to go uphill a bit. Sitting outside in front of her Porsche, there was a little girl wearing glasses who must have been 10 or 11 years old, just like me. At that time, there was no one else to talk to. So I asked her name. She told me her name was Lily. She loved playing outside while I didn't. But we shared an interest in video games. I knew that we would get along perfectly, thanks to that. But there was one thing she hadn't told me during the weeks we spent having fun together. She really loved horror movies. As for me, I was a real coward, and I hated anything that could scare me. So, of course, I didn't really like that side of her. To make matters worse, she had a ton of figurines, horror movies, and lots of tapes. Some of the scariest works you could find. All of that piled up in her room. Every time I visited her, she would deliberately try to scare me with one of her Freddy Krueger figurines, or by making me watch movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with her in the dark. Also, her room was quite special. It didn't look like a girl's room at all. She had a bunk bed, even though she was an only child and lived only with her grandmother. She slept on the bottom bunk, and all her dolls and figurines were arranged on the top bunk. Her grandmother's limited wealth prevented her from renovating the house. Lily's room had holes in the wall, making the atmosphere even scarier, especially when watching movies. One day, when she realized that I hated everything she had made me watch, she started telling me urban legends. Most of them were about our city in general, and some were about our neighborhood in particular. But I didn't believe them, or at least not until she told me the legend of the Hanged Man's Hill. It was about a year after we met. We were riding our bikes in our neighborhood. And yes, it was Lily who taught me how to ride. She had stopped in front of a house we had nicknamed the Junkie's Den. I think it's pointless to go into details and explain to you why we called it that. Lily seemed to be looking at the little path behind the den that gradually went uphill. She had a knack for always finding a new place in our neighborhood to show me. So when she motioned for me to follow her down that path, I fell in step without question. The path climbed up a hill and was scattered with sand and pebbles, which could very well have made us fall if we hadn't been careful. All along the climb, I felt like the trees were closing in on us. That lasted until we reached the path's top. Apart from the bottles scattered on the ground, the only things made by humans in this area were the tall telephone poles stretching as far as the eye could see. If it weren't for the forest blocking the view, you could have thought it went on forever. The place didn't look particularly interesting. I expected her to take me to a cemetery or some other scary place. But like this, in the light of the setting sun, the scenery in front of us was particularly beautiful. I thought she would find a way to startle me, but instead, she just turned to me with the most serious and sullen expression I had ever seen on her face.
"Here we are, the Hanged Man's Hill,"
she murmured. The Hanged Man's Hill. Is that a note from your stories?
"In a way, but this one is true."
I rolled my eyes at the thought. How could she expect me to believe those stories? She kept looking at me with the same expression, waiting for my answer. How can it be called the Hanged Man's Hill? There isn't a single hanged man here, and there are hills as far as the eye can see.
"Right there, look."
She pointed at a telephone pole that stood between the two hills closest to us. A small stream ran through the middle of it, and the pole itself seemed scarier than her story.
"Roy Terrence,"
she whispered.
"Who?" "The legend of the Hanged Man wouldn't exist without a hanged man."
She suddenly went down the first hill with her orange bike, and I tried to follow her, but my bike wasn't as good as hers. Not only was mine a faded red, but the chain was even hanging down, almost touching the ground. It didn't take much for the branches of the nearby trees and twigs to get tangled up in it. And before I even realized it, I fell headfirst all the way down the hill. I landed on my knees and there was a big splash. Fortunately, there were only a few centimeters of water in the stream. I almost called Lily for help, but I noticed she had stopped a little further ahead and was staring at the top of the telephone pole. "A little help would be nice, please," I shouted. Lily took her eyes off the pole, just long enough to pull me out of the creek and help me back on my feet. After that, she started staring at it again, as if she was seeing something. "Who or what are you looking for again?" And I was grumbling in frustration. It'd be bad if she made me come here for nothing, especially after hurting my knee. I hadn't felt any pain before I was out of the water, but after that, it really hurt.
Reuterens owns the small cabin visible behind the trees.
I hadn't noticed the cabin before that. It was just behind a huge oak tree, but the cabin itself wasn't very big.
After his wife and children left him, he hanged himself using the pole's cable, right above us. The police didn't find much when they came to collect the body because it had mostly burned. Legend has it that no matter who is nearby at the exact time of his death, they end up hanging from the wire with him.
Oh really? Then tell me, what time is it supposed to happen? For the first time in a few minutes, his serious expression turned into a grimace. Then she shrugged her shoulders to let me know she didn't know. "What do you suggest? That we stay here and wait?" Even though I have tons of excuses not to stay, I think I'll go with the one about "It's late, and my mom will be waiting for me for dinner. I have to go home."
Alright, fine. Tell your mom you're sleeping at my place tomorrow night and I'll tell my grandma the opposite. And meet me here at 7 p.m.
Even though I had a bad feeling, I decided to accept. It was free, I knew she lied. And going there with her would only confirm that point. It's true that none of those stories had seemed real to me until then. But the change in her tone when she told me this one added a bit of credibility, because when she told me those other stories, she couldn't stop laughing. As we turned around to head home, and the last rays of sunlight disappeared, I asked her, "Why did you seem so serious? Normally you laugh at everything."
I lost my grandfather because of Roy Terrence. My grandmother was with him when it all happened. Have you ever wondered why she was so unpleasant all the time?
It was true that his grandmother was quite brusque, but I never asked why. If all of that was an elaborate lie by Lily, she really went all out to make me believe it. When I went to bed that night, I had a terrible nightmare. Like most people, I couldn't remember everything. All I know is that it was about Roy. And even though it was really hot that night, I woke up shivering. The day went well, and at 6 o'clock I started packing my bag. Inside, I put a flashlight and a few bags of chips. And at 6:30, I drove like crazy to go meet Lily. I have to admit that I was pretty excited. Then finally, at around 6:50, I arrived near the stream where Lily had already set up a small fire. She was roasting marshmallows there. Seeing that, I knew that if I hadn't come, she would have been really disappointed. "So, how is this going to go?" "We're going to camp here all night. After all, we don't even know when he's going to show up." And I say, after swallowing her marshmallow, she said,
I'll wait as long as it takes.
"As you wish." And I replied as I sat down by the fire. Then I took out a bag of chips that I had brought back. After about 3 hours, the first crickets had already started their incessant chirping. As for the sun, it had completely set, and I was starting to feel irritated and a bit strange too. Lily, on the other hand, was wide awake, her hands glued to her bag of marshmallows. She had started staring intently at the telephone pole. "Lily, I'm tired. And if I don't see a guy hanged and burned to a crisp in the next hour, I'm going home."
"Okay,"
she said, stuffing more marshmallows into her mouth. I started watching the fire and began to doze off. And just as I was about to fall asleep, a loud cracking sound echoed through the hills and into the woods. I immediately sat up. My vision was still blurry as my eyes tried to adjust. I could barely see Lily's silhouette. Her mouth was wide open, her eyes wide, her head tilted up toward the telephone pole. And following her gaze, despite the darkness, I thought I saw something at the very top of the pole. In an instant, Lily jumped on her bike and started pedaling, her bag of marshmallows still in her hands. I managed to get up and get on my bike. I was pedaling like crazy before I realized my chain had come off. Stupid bike. As my eyes adjusted more and more to the darkness, I looked again all the way up the pole, and what I saw terrified me. Roy Terrence was no longer really a person, but rather a hanging figure of flesh. Black flesh, like the night, was hanging from his bones. His facial expression, although it was hard to read, seemed to be a mix of agony and joy. And that eye, the only eye he had left, was deeply sunken into its socket. And it stared at me fixedly, with absolute hatred. And just when I felt like he was about to try to come down and grab me, the poor piece of spine that held his head to the pile of flesh that was his body broke off with a horrible sound. And what was left of his head fell into the fire. What had Lily done? And just before the fire reduced it to ashes, his head gave me a disturbing smile. Near the hilltop, I realized I had managed to move. I followed the tire tracks that Lily had left behind her. And strangely, they were going in a direction opposite to our neighborhood. But as I reached the top of the hill, I saw a slender figure moving above the ground. I immediately let out a cry of surprise. Lily's bike, the beautiful orange bike she loved so much, was lying on the ground at the foot of another telephone pole, and at the very top of it, Lily's body was hanging lifeless. To be honest, it no longer resembled Lily. She hadn't stayed on the pole's wires as long as Roy, which made the sight even more nightmarish. She was charred, but not completely yet. Her eyes were bulging out of their sockets, emphasizing the shocked expression on her face. What was left of her long hair was partially burnt, standing up on her head, and smoke was coming out of it. It looked like a multitude of cables were tightly wrapped around Lily's neck, like dozens of boa constrictors. And meanwhile, from her burned arm, you could see her bag of marshmallows that had melted and fused into her skin. Afterwards, the police investigation didn't reveal much, and Lily's body was never found. They combed through the entire area, but found no evidence that anyone other than us had been there. I begged them to check the telephone poles, but they assured me there was no evidence that anyone had touched them either. The search continued for 3 weeks, and when the police finally gave up the investigation, Lily's grandmother passed away. During the days leading up to her death, she didn't say a single word. She just kept staring at the photo she always held in her hands, a photo of her and her husband. After Lily's grandmother's house was emptied, the police officers were kind enough to offer me to keep what was in her room. Her entire horror movie collection, her figurines, and everything else were donated to charities at my request. Years have passed, and my family and I have since left the city. But a few years later, I went back there. There was almost nothing left of the place where Lily and I had the worst experience of our lives. After briefly speaking about my dearly missed friend, I was ready to go, but then I spotted something from the corner of my eye. Hanging on a telephone pole, there was a half-burnt bag of marshmallows.